if you want to support the show, any of the shows, either this or whichever show, I'm not on right now because this is just a blanket ad for all of them, and the website, you can go to bewareofspoilers.com. In the description for any of the episodes of Beware of Spoilers, there is the option to donate. If you don't want to donate that way, you can donate directly through the website. We do have that, mwpnews.com. And if you don't want to support that way, then going to mwpnews.com will help out because we have ads there. We don't want to keep it, with it a lot of ads. There's a few ads. But the point is we want to make it so that way, we can sustain this for the long term. If people donate, we're never going to paywall anything, I don't think, as of right now. But if people start donating, we'll start doing cooler and cooler stuff. Like donations are how we get to cover stuff like Tribeca and other, film festivals. And, we may be able to bring on more people to help out. So if you want to help out the show and you want more content from us, by all means, even just going and giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify helps out a lot. But that's it. That's the only ad we'll have on the podcast ever. But here's whatever podcast you're going to be listening to. Good morning, and welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. The penultimate episode, previously on, I believe it was called, because here's the episode where we get to sit down and find out everything in Wanda's past. Which is why I think she's not dead. Because here's the thing. Going into this episode, we know very little. And up until this point, there's even a point where it's like she doesn't have a nickname, referring to the fact that they'd never called her the Scarlet Witch at any point in the MCU up until this point. She doesn't have a weird nickname. And they're like, no, she's just Wanda Maximoff. And that's the thing. She was experimented on by Hydra. She joins Ultron. She defects with Pietro and joins the Avengers in Age of Ultron. And then she accidentally kills a bunch of people in Lagos. And then she, has to kill Vision. And then kills him. Then time gets turned back. And she has to watch him die a second time. And then she dies, and then she doesn't even get the chance to kill Thanos in Vengeance because Thanos starts raining hell from the sky, which is another thing they mentioned. I do appreciate they mentioned that. It's like, well, she would have mentioned, she would have killed Thanos if he didn't start, nuking from orbit. And therein lies kind of my whole thing with this show. Why are we going into such detail to explain, no, she actually is a witch. She's been a witch since the beginning. We are just going to sit here, and all the Mind Stone is going to do is jumpstart her abilities, and it's going to awaken her abilities as the Scarlet Witch. And why are we going to go into all of this detail when you could have just said, oh, she found the Darkhold in the years between, and now she's the Scarlet Witch? Why go back to her childhood and retcon that she's always been this way? Why retcon what happened in Sokovia when she was captured, and not captured, but volunteered for experimentation by Baron Strucker? Why go through all of this effort if she's just going to end up killed off after one more episode and then a movie? It feels like a waste for the character. And this is the other thing, too. The way this episode ends. I think the big thing that needed to happen with this show, and I alluded to this a few weeks ago, is that very clearly Wanda needed to be the bad guy from the beginning, and Agatha almost had to be the protagonist. The issue is you don't want to take this character who's been around for so long and immediately turn her into being the bad guy. But the problem is, because of a lack of commitment as the show comes to an end with the idea of making Wanda a bad guy, and we'll talk about it next week when we talk about the finale, she doesn't come off as... She comes off at the end of this as, I've moved through my trauma, I am now the Scarlet Witch, I'm ready to move on and do good and make up for what I did here. That's how this ends. It doesn't end with her being like, oh, look, and now I'm worse off and all of that. Like, yes, it like the post credit, if I remember correctly, does have her reading the Darkhold while astrally projecting, and she's trying to figure out how to traverse the multiverse to find her kids. And okay, I get it. Like, I understand what it is that they're saying happened here. My issue with it is there's not enough here, for lack of a better word, to make me go like, oh, this is a good choice was made here. Because one of the things that I said when I had seen, when I had seen Multiverse of Madness years ago when it came out, 2 years ago at this point, I said it felt like the same way it felt after watching Jurassic World, where someone told them there was a movie called Jurassic Park, and you, the audience, if you know there was a movie called Jurassic Park but didn't remember anything else, that's probably the best position to be in, because the continuity with Jurassic Park is kind of nebulous. Like, here, it's kind of the same thing. Where, like, if you know there's a show called WandaVision, you know she had kids with Vision, that's kind of all you need to know. And the fact that if you only know that, you're probably better off. But I don't think that's the fault of Multiverse of Madness. It's the fault of this show. And I think the thing is, it's like, the idea of her at the end, framing it this way, where it's like, Agatha, at the end of this show, has these two children, at the end of her magic. And she goes, Wanda, what you're doing is very dangerous. You're using chaos magic, and you've created life with it. Like, you don't understand what kind of power you're wielding. That's something that's very interesting a very interesting situation to put her in. And the issue is they don't do enough with it, because we see her holding these kids hostage, we immediately are like, oh, she's the bad guy. She has to be the bad guy. She can't have a point. She's the bad guy. And that's not a good place to put this character. Because the thing is, at the end of this show, the person who's in the wrong the most, out of everyone here, including the person holding the lives of 2 children hostage, and it's like, oh yeah, he was gonna, we'll get to it next week, where it's like, oh, he was gonna kill 2 children. It's like, the amount of power being wielded here is incredibly dangerous, and you can kind of see where she's coming from, where it's like, this is a very dangerous situation to be in. And this heel turn, where it's like, okay, and Agatha's here, and Agatha wants to kill the kids, Agatha's now the bad guy. Agatha is not necessarily the bad guy for the entire show. She's the bad guy because she wants the power of the Scarlet Witch for herself. Because she's a witch who wants more power. That's the thing that fundamentally makes her dangerous. But the problem is, her being worse than Wanda doesn't exonerate Wanda. And that's the key thing here. We act like Wanda leaves the show, and I did it too. I'm not saying I'm innocent in all of this as well. I talked about it where it's like, well, Wanda made peace with it, so why would she want to do this? Wanda never really does. Wanda, we understand why she does what she does, and the show kind of lays it out for you very simply, where it's like, she had Pietro for the first time. She got through it with Pietro. Then she got the powers. Then Pietro died, and she had Vision. Then Vision died, and she has no one. Because Captain America's dead. She was never close with Tony Stark. Like, there is no person to fill that void for her. And I think part of that comes from, like, I feel like, realistically, Hawkeye would have filled that role for her. Like, that's the one thing that requires a little suspension of disbelief in this whole thing, is that when she goes to SWORD headquarters to get the body, like, and say goodbye to Vision. And it's a heartbreaking moment where she goes and she's doing the magic on his head. She's like, I can't feel you. Like, that moment is, it's just heartbreaking. Hawkeye should have been there for that. And the fact that Hawkeye wasn't there for that is something that hasn't been addressed, because that's the thing about Age of Ultron, looking back. He kind of takes that role as, as a father figure for her. Like, that was the whole thing where it's like when you get that fight, that moment where he's talking to her in the church, which is probably the best moment in the entirety of that movie, where he's like, I'm in a city that's in the air. I have a bow and arrow. I'm fighting a bunch of killer robots. None of this makes sense. You can sit in here and you can be scared, but just know if you come out that door, you're an Avenger. And she comes out of that door and just fucking murks the Ultron drones that are flying around. And it's probably the strongest moment in that movie. And for that guy, especially considering the role that Hawkeye has even in the Civil War, and then we don't see the two of them interact in Endgame, because he's not in Infinity War, but we don't see them interact in Endgame. But it's one of those things where it's like, why is he not there? Like, why is he not there with her? And it's like, look, I get it. He's going through a lot in this moment too, because he just got his family back, and like that's the thing, is that we're creating a situation, and I think that they do that pretty well, where it's like, oh, she has nobody because everyone has their own thing going on, and there's no one for her. There's no one there to be her person that she can lean on, and it's like, look, I get that he's trying to make up for lost time. And because he had a rough time while his kids and his wife were gone. I get it, and I totally understand that. I do feel like he would have made the time to do that, considering he had that moment. He gets a moment with Yelena to kind of close up the Black Widow story and close up with Natasha, and have that moment of like, look, if I could have talked her out of it, I would have died instead of her. Like, and if you're gonna kill me, just kill me. Like, that moment in Hawkeye even is great. The problem is you don't get that with this kind of, what's it called? With this, with this. You don't get that. He doesn't get that moment with her that I think is needed for both characters, considering the paternal role he took on throughout that. And it's kind of a shame. And that's the thing, is that it's like, they created a situation, like, I think they could have done more to show her isolation after Endgame. And I think that that's kind of the biggest thing that was missing. Is that it's like, why does no one go with her? And it's like, just be like, oh, well, and then Clint went off with his family, and, Scott went off with his family, and T'Challa went back to Wakanda, and, Natasha was dead, and, Steve is God knows where. He's 700 years old now. Like, Tony's dead. She has no one in her life at that point. So you see why it happened, and you see why she did it, but it doesn't make it okay. It's the cool motive still murder moment of the show, where it's like, yeah, you did something wrong, and I get why you did it, but you shouldn't have done it. And that's kind of what my big issue was with this season, with this show. And I think that, like, no, you create this, like, I feel like this may also be the moment of, like, we know this is going to be the emotional resonating point of the show, with, Vision telling her in that flashback, what is grief if not love persevering? Like, that's going to be the emotional hook of the show. And I think the other thing is, too, it's like, this episode has to stay in for when the show comes out, because of the fact that it comes out at the beginning of 2021, as we're going through kind of this collective trauma over COVID and the pandemic and the shutdown and everything that went along with it. And it just hits perfectly because of that. It hits perfectly because of a lot of things that are happening in the real world at the same time. The issue becomes, well, what about, this feels like the same thing where originally in Frozen, it's supposed to be Anna as the bad guy the entire time, as this irredeemable Ice Queen, but then you get Let It Go, and it's like, well, this is a great thing, we'll rework it around this. And I feel like where they reworked Frozen from the ground up, they didn't quite rework this from the ground up. So you get a lot of where it's like, okay, so we gotta make someone worse than her, and we gotta make two people worse than her, because you got Hayward who's worse than her, and then you got Agatha who's worse than her. It's just a lot that kind of feels disconnected and not well executed to the point where you're like, it just feels kind of weird a lot of the times, and that's not a good thing for a show that's in its penultimate episode. Like in terms of like penultimate, I think that this is kind of where they hit it out of the park. A lot of these Disney Plus shows, that second to last episode is a lot of times very strong. That's where you get the episode of Moon Knight, where you get the the origin of Mark Spector and I forgot what the other alter ego is. Um, then you get the episode of what was the other one? The one which is entirely in the insane asylum too, where they're in the Egyptian afterlife. Um, then there's the episode with what's it called of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which we will be doing. Same as we're doing this. We're doing Falcon and the Winter Soldier again in a few weeks in the lead up to Captain America: Brave New World. But looking at this, these episodes are always really great. And that episode, you get the one, like, it's the one that opens with them taking the shield back and Sam acknowledging his role as Captain America and having the conversation with Isaiah about, why he doesn't think Sam should take up the mantle. And he tells the story of what he did. And it's like, oh, fuck, that's just exactly what Steve did. But he's black, so he ended up in prison for 30 years. Like, it's a... And you don't see a flashback. It's just Carl Lumley delivering this great monologue. They do a great job of these episodes. The issue is they don't put the isolation that she feels at the forefront, and that's the big mistake here. And then on top of that, it is the immediate. She's the bad guy. She wants to take... Not Wanda. Agatha is the bad guy. Agatha wants the power of the Darkhold. Agatha wants the power of the Chaos Magic. That is the big thing that we take away from this by the end of the episode. And it's like... But, like, that doesn't exonerate her either. And it's kind of just, like... I don't know. And then, like, there's a way you can do this where it's like, she's not... Like... I think it's more interesting, especially with the advent of the Agatha show coming in like 2 weeks from when this airs. I'm recording this in the beginning of August, and like I think with the Agatha show coming in a few weeks, I think that it would have been a more interesting place to put it, where Agatha's more of a tragic character, where she's not a bad guy because she wants to take the powers of the Scarlet Witch for herself and use the Chaos Magic to take over the world. That's not why she's the bad guy. She's the antagonist to Wanda because she wants to stop Wanda. She's another witch who's like, oh crap, look at what she's doing. We gotta stop this. And I think you can keep the same flair that Kathryn Hahn brings to it, and then when you get to the end of the next episode, which we'll talk about in depth next week, but when you get to the end of the next episode and Agatha traps her in the Agnes persona, like, that becomes a tragic way for that character to end. And it's unfortunate that it's like, oh, she was trying to do the, like, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's purely the fact that she wants the power for herself that makes her the bad guy here. If not for that, she's 100% in the right. And it's kind of weird that's kind of a turn she takes in the second to last episode. And that's unfortunate. And I think that had they done that from the beginning, it flows better into Multiverse of Madness than doing what they did here. But we'll talk about that over the next 2 weeks. Until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.